Hey guys, it's Matt. In this video, I'll be looking at the Battle of Gettysburg, the most famous and largest battle of the United States Civil War, 1863, in order to prove that reality has completely broken down and there's been some sort of metaphysical or temporal shift in reality itself. I will not invoke the first and last name of an ex-president of a failed state at the bottom of Africa in order to do this. I don't want to trigger anyone. The, quote, facts here that seem to shift around daily speak for themselves. And if anyone's new here, I need to maintain a level of professionalism in this presentation. I'd like to do things like, what? Reality is what? You're going to prove it's broken down? What the hell did I stumble upon? I'd love to get into that. I must maintain a level of professionalism when something this bizarre is being presented. I might send this to my mother. Who knows where this presentation will end up? The facts speak for themselves. I'm not some loon that's going to come before you and say all of reality is shifted. This is irrefutable, whatever that means. The first step in this process is an exercise for you, where I'll ask you to recall whatever you know about the Battle of Gettysburg in terms of the number of dead, and then cement that, hold on to it, because there's a force in this world that will try to take that from you and align it with what appears in the history books today. If you don't know the exact number, just get a picture of how bloody you believe it to be, or how massive, or whatever it may be. I don't want to influence you anymore. How many dead on each side, the Union North, the Confederate South, the Battle of Gettysburg, the main battle in the United States Civil War that turned the tide against the South. If you don't know the numbers or don't recall the history you remember, just maybe generalize what you expect to see as I show this to you going forward. As you try to recollect what you remember about the number of dead on each side, the Battle of Gettysburg, let's just look at this one chart, one slide. Again, if you're listening or you're at work or something, I'm going to show a lot of things. You don't need to see any of it. Battle strength, the Union North, over 93,000 troops. Confederate South, the Grays, over 70,000. Over 90,000, over 70,000. Bottom, but one up from the bottom, cavalrymen, 11,800 on horses for the North, 6,660 on horses for the South, 360 cannons for the North, 280 cannons for the South. Another chart here from a different source. Numbers are a little bit different. Size of the Northern Army, the Union, 93,900, almost 94,000, versus 71,000 or almost 72,000 for the darker here shown for the Confederate South. I direct your attention to the middle. Killed. The little tiny bars, can you see them? For the North, total killed, 3,155 for the North, 3,903 for the South. Is that what you recollect or remember being told about the Battle of Gettysburg? Is that the history that's cemented into your reality? That means, literally crunching the numbers and making it a percentage, for the Union North, you only have a 3.3% chance of dying in the battle if you were just a Union private walking behind a horse carrying a rifle. We're not going to get into the gematria. Who knows where this presentation may end up? Like I said, maybe I'll send it to my mother. I'm not going to get into, I know the numbers before. Okay, we'll forget all that. Doesn't matter in what is being presented here. Crunching the numbers for the Union South, the chances of dying if you entered as a Confederate soldier, the Battle of Gettysburg, just over 5%. Almost a 95% chance of living through the battle. The Civil War would continue to be fought for almost 2 more years after Gettysburg, although the tide really turned against the South. You know, all that Sherman's March stuff and the decimation of Atlanta, all that happened later. So if you're some young man living in Mississippi and you turned 18 the summer of 1863 after Gettysburg, your mother and father wouldn't let you go join the Confederate Army, but I'm 18 now, I'm a man, I'm going to join the Confederate cause. No, don't go, you'll die. Ma, it'll be fine. There was only a 5% chance of dying even at Gettysburg. So even in the worst battle, there's a 95% chance that I don't die. Really? The numbers are that good? The numbers are that good, Ma. And that was Gettysburg, which means in some of these other battles, almost nobody dies. Oh, I feel so much better now. You go join the Confederates and you help them out. Oh, I will, Ma. I will. There's a lot of strange things going on here. And as you'll see, as this plays out moving forward, it's centered around the definition of the word casualty. What is a casualty? Does it just mean death? Or in the history that exists today, it means almost anything. It means missing. It means captured. It means wounded. There's a shift of casualty numbers in the 20-some thousands for the Union side, the 28,000 or so, approaching 30,000 for the Confederate side. When I talked to my friend Greg, we always remembered, sure, in the history books, as it was presented to us in school, it was presented as total casualties. We took away, this is total dead. 23 to 25,000 on the north, 27 to 28,000 or so, whatever it may be on the south. This is the history that we took away. And someone will say, well, surely, Matt, if you were kind of a little bit off in your understanding of the way history wants to present the word casualty, which you'll see in what you're going to present yourself, Matt, that it includes missing, wounded, and captured, well, you guys were just wrong. Yeah, I understand if I was taking a podium against somebody and the entire basis of this presentation was just going to be centered on the definition of casualty, it wouldn't get very far. I'm going to show you, basically prove to you, and I think it's 100%, that there's no possible way only 3.3% of the Union soldiers died at Gettysburg. All the quotes, all the eyewitness testimony comes in hundreds and hundreds of different places, all add up to a much, much more massive slaughter. Are you kidding me? 3.3% chance that you don't die if you're a Union soldier? Just over 5% or almost 95% you live if you go into Gettysburg as a Southern soldier. I'm going to show you that's impossible based on all the other history and all the snippets of history of how massive the carnage was. Why reality wants to play games with what was, and in my opinion, what is the true dead number, the total casualty number of 20-some thousand that we were presented is the number dead. That lines up with the history and the eyewitnesses and everything else, even the paintings that I'll show you. Why reality wants to play games with that and make it a tiny little number of dead, I don't know. It is a reality breakdown. It's not just people changing the definition of casualty in books, okay? You'll see that going forward. This gets very detailed. There's tons of slides. I'm going to be all over the place. If this was the only video that I made once a month, it would be all perfectly timed out and in order. I may do 5 to 6 videos sometimes a week. This is the way I have to do it. I hope you have the patience to stick with me because it does this more than almost anything else, proves that we are in some sort of bizarro, fluid reality. Okay, here I'm just going to read, say, the bottom 2 lines. This is the history that I was presented. This is the history Greg remembers that was presented to him. So at the bottom, blah, blah, blah. Union cavalry attempted to compromise the Confederate right flank, but failed in every attempt. The Battle of Gettysburg had ended with more than 50,000 total casualties. This is how it was presented to us. We studied the history, we studied the carnage, we studied Pickett's charge, and it was simply 50,000 casualties. If this number was just going to be, 85% other things like captured, wounded, missing, and it wasn't representing dead, don't you think this history that we saw over and over again, I'll show this to you, would have presented another sentence saying, let me explain what the word casualty means here. Everybody would take this away as you would interpret it as dead. All right, this is the history that was shown to us in the 80s and the 90s, and there's some more examples of this. Okay, guys, one last reminder. Even if you think I'm getting too far into the weeds on history's new definition of casualty, okay, even if you think I'm wasting my time there, and there'll be many slides showing how the new history is presenting itself, okay, I'm still going to show you it's basically impossible for this tiny little number of dead to exist on each side, especially the South, the rebels. It's just not possible. Pickett's charge. I'll show you from some of these, say, eyewitness testimony, or how this sergeant recorded the details of Pickett's charge, the last desperate charge of the South, I think on the 3rd day. Pickett's charge alone, I'll show you, should have produced far more dead in one charge on one battle than the entire history says were produced in terms of total dead for the South over all 3 days. It's impossible. Now, the other thing is, well, Matt, it's not a reality breakdown or Mandela effect, or they're just massaging history. Okay, we can argue about that later. Let's do one step at a time. Before we leave this image, this is your typical field kit for a doctor, for the battlefield, a saw, all these disgusting pieces of equipment that are dirty. I mean, how come if history presents huge numbers of wounded, why didn't that per final history translate into dead? Quick story you would think maybe relates or doesn't relate. 30 seconds or less. My friend Pam was bitten by my cat Zara. It got so infected when she went to the doctor didn't even feel comfortable giving her antibiotic, like doxycycline pills. The doctor said, I need to give you an antibiotic shot. Now, she was on the verge of death? Well, no, but the doctor's saying this is getting very, very serious. From one little bite, from one little cat, think of what would have happened on the battlefield at Gettysburg. They didn't have any antibiotics. They didn't have anything. 90% or so of those wounded, I don't know the exact number, but a huge number of wounded would have within weeks translated into the dead. Why doesn't history reflect that? Well, Matt, once someone gets wounded, the history that loses track of them, they go home. No, you'll see the history that's presented in terms of the numbers. It's very, very detailed. It's very strange to me how they could even have this accounting so perfect on the Union as well as the Southern rebel Confederate side. Now, the numbers are always presented in exact detail. And if that's the case, you can't give them a pass and say, well, Matt, maybe 85% of the wounded did die just weeks later, but there was no way for history to record that. That's not consistent with what history presents in terms of all the other immaculate record keeping it keeps regarding the Civil War in general and this battle. Okay, so far I'm presenting like common sense, just anecdotal, whatever that means, that there should have been far more dead. But if this is a reality shift or Mandela effect, there will be residuals. There will be a lot of evidence that lines up that there were a lot more dead. How about something like this that I found? Again, I don't know where I got this. If I was doing one documentary a year, everything would be perfect and well documented. It's hard to do that when you put 5 to 6 videos a week, but here we go. I mean, I didn't just type this out myself. This is from a reputable source. The Battle of Gettysburg remains the bloodiest battle in the United States history, with a combined 51,000 men killed in the battle. All right, let me repeat that. I don't know where this came from, but these guys just got it wrong. Well, the Library of Congress, as early as 1900, should have had a final record on what exactly happened at Gettysburg. Okay, so you'll see all these, I don't have too many of these sources. If this was all I was doing for week after week, I could pull hundreds of these showing the number of killed per what these websites to believe to be documented history was way higher. The numbers that Greg and I remember. It says here, before we move on, the Battle of Gettysburg remains the bloodiest battle in United States history, with a combined over 51,000 men killed in the battle. Don't say nothing about wounded. Don't say nothing about missing or captured. Okay, not a lot of history says it that directly, killed. Mostly the history is presented like this. Chickamauga was second only to Gettysburg in the total number of casualties suffered by both sides, 34,600 to 51,000 respectively. After battles, soldiers still had to attend to the injured and the dead. In large battles such as Gettysburg, the task of burial alone was monumental. The Confederate dead at the Battle of Gettysburg was so numerous that they were buried in crowded trenches. Since the battle lasted 3 days, attention to the dead had to be delayed as the living continued to fight. Basic tools such as shovels, blah, 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 blah. Okay, typically this is the way it's always been presented to Greg, myself, to many of you. 51,000 casualties. Now, how would you take that if you read that in a history book in 7th or 9th grade? They just forgot to put the fine print telling you that don't assume that this 51,000 is actually dead. 95% are still alive, wounded, missing, or captured. It would if it was a small number of dead. That's the way history presents itself today. I'm saying it is a reality shift. There's no way you'd have hundreds of sources presenting it like this. Like we're just supposed to know that this does not imply 51,000 dead? We're supposed to know that this implies 95% of the 51,000 actually lived? You've got to be kidding me. Here's another one. On July 4th, again, the battle was July 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 1863. July 4th, a truce was called, so each side could collect their dead and wounded. In the July heat, the stench of the decomposing bodies, which littered the fields, caused many in Gettysburg to become violently ill. As many as 51,000 casualties were documented at the end of the Battle of Gettysburg, with the Confederacy suffering as many as 28,000 and the Union about 23,000. Lee's Army of the North Virginia retreated back to Virginia, Okay, get just presented as casualties, but we're supposed to know, Matt, this, and everybody would know this doesn't imply dead. Anybody reading this wouldn't think dead. You would think most lived. Okay, it's fair at this point to look at the definition of casualty. A person killed or injured in a war or accident. Person killed or injured. Two problems. History includes missing and captured. That's not a casualty by any definition. And none of the wounded translate into the dead. For the final numbers, we can't get this right by 2023. And you saw the little doctor's kit. If you let's say you took one of these musket balls above the heart or something, you're going to live through that? 90% would have been dead in 2 weeks to 2 months. Come on, man. Come on, sir. Pickett's charge by itself presents a huge problem for history. Pickett's charge, this desperate attempt by Lee in the South in the last day of fighting, July 3rd, to charge 12,000 men right at the Union to create some sort of gap or something. It's desperate, and Lee's some sort of hero. I mean, Lee, you've got to be kidding me. They should have ripped all his, not for the other issues, for this issue, they should have ripped all his statues down by 1865 before the war even ended, not just recently. Pickett's charge, 12,000 men, devastating artillery fire that killed or wounded groups of soldiers in a single blast. The carnage quickly demoralized, and the Confederate soldiers, many of whom turned around and ran. Others were gunned down by musket fire as they neared the stone wall. Pickett's charge was a massacre. Of the 12,500 soldiers who advanced upon Cemetery Ridge, only half were killed, or over half. Only half. Reality's got me doing it. Over half were killed or wounded. Just Pickett's charge, the number of dead. One battle, one charge. The number of dead easily exceeds, per the eyewitness accounts of what Pickett's charge was, exceeds the total dead that history tells us for all 3 days over the entire battle. I mean, let's just keep doing this over and over again. This is ridiculous. This is just one more piece of supporting documentation for Pickett's charge. In the middle, 12,500 men, a direct charge against the Union Army. Pickett's attack ultimately failed, resulting in over half of his men being injured or killed. And as we discussed, the injured would have very quickly become the killed. This is what history is doing today. Of these casualties, 7,000 were fatalities. That's on both sides. Just history of 2023 records 7,000 dead. That's it. 3,155 Union, 3,900 Confederate, another 33,264. We'll talk about the gematria later, guys. Again, my mother wouldn't understand. The 33,264 had been wounded. 14,529 Union, 18,735 Confederate, and 10,790 were missing. Other recent history breaks that number up into where the captured they call casualties. This doesn't even mention that there was one man captured. This history just assumes no one was captured. It is all over the place, and it is bizarre. Remember that chart coming in. The bars off to the right. Wounded, 14,000 versus 18,000. Missing or captured, 5,365 for the North, 5,425 for the South. Just a side note, guys, the severity of losses or the toll taken on each side being about the same, that is the history that I remember, no doubt. Gettysburg is seen as a victory for the Union Army in the North. It's called the Army of the Potomac. But it's not like it was 3-1 or anything like that. It's similar. Most battles in the Civil War, the number of dead and injured was very similar, except the Union North had, basically, compared to the South, unlimited supplies, unlimited manpower, resources, the ability to get more loans, the ability to do whatever. The South could not play this game of attrition, where if the South lined up, they couldn't just go 1-for-1. They had to beat the North 2-1, 3-1. Eventually, they would lose. But that's the thing. That was basically one of the strategies of the North. Just almost as long as the battles in terms of the losses were equal, the South would eventually lose. They didn't have that much in reserve compared to the North in terms of infrastructure and supplies. That's why it's so insane that General Lee, this supposed hero, kept lining up massive army against massive army in the North. For years he did this. When kids just playing around on the playground could figure out in like month 2 that they have to change their tactics to guerrilla tactics. But no, for years, Lee lines up his massive army against the massive army of the North. The North knows that the South doesn't have one advantage in terms of this word attrition. Supplies, replacing muskets, cannons, even manpower, infrastructure, the ability even to source food or water. The South doesn't have one advantage. Yet Lee engages in these battles where the carnage is like 2,000 dead on each side or whatever the numbers might be, very similar. Where the North is like, we can do this all day long. Any idiot would have changed tactics, knowing the South just can't keep doing this with equal carnage year after year. I mean, I don't want to really stray in this video, but I do question, I don't think Lee was dumb. All right, I know I've talked about this recently, so we'll get back to the main point of this presentation. Now, Gettysburg itself doesn't add up or make any sense, but Lee isn't dumb. I don't think kids playing at recess could figure out what Lee didn't. Therefore, you must question Lee's motives. Sorry. Library of Congress. This date in history, July 3rd. 28,000 Confederates and 23,000 Union soldiers were killed or wounded at Gettysburg. Okay, there's basically, you're just over 50,000. When the other sources cite over 50,000 casualties, here you go from the Library of Congress, 28,000, 23,000. It says specifically killed or wounded. It does not say casualties. What's the problem at? Well, the problem is the last chart we just looked at showed 10,000 missing or captured. That was included in the casualty number. So the casualty number over here, we'll talk about missing or captured as part of the total casualty number. The Library of Congress specifically says killed or wounded. Now, this inconsistency, it's not like 200 people over here. Matt, the inconsistency is only with 25 people. They're being inconsistent with 10,000. You've got to be kidding me. What is going on here? Okay, here's a book dedicated to the dead at Gettysburg, about the dead, and just Gettysburg. The whole book is just Gettysburg. It says, here, at least 10,000 Union and Confederate soldiers lost their lives as a result of the Battle of Gettysburg, at least 10,000. As you'll see, I think that number is ridiculously low, but this is just another example of the inconsistency. So the official number from a Library of Congress or a federal source, I mean, wouldn't all the information have to come from a federal source, come from one well? So the officials just says 7,000 and something for both. This guy says over 10,000, okay? It's at least a 3,000 person discrepancy. How's he doing his research other than what the U.S. government is telling him? At 3,000 discrepancy, it's roughly per the percentage of dead, which is so low, it's roughly 30% difference what, say, the government is putting out and what this person in the book is putting out. It's just another example of all the numbers bounce all over the place all the time. One more example of the history that I remember, the history that once was, and this is a fair presentation, okay? This is another example. Lee led his army on a torturous retreat back to Virginia. Between 46,000 and 51,000 soldiers from both armies were casualties in the 3-day battle, the most costly in U.S. history. Okay, it's very fair to not know exactly how many wounded or exactly how many dead are, say, in the total number of 50,000. Very fair, because many of the wounded would become dead. That's a fair presentation. But now, again, we see the missing and the captured included in the casualty number. And reality is going out of its way to document that the dead is this low, ridiculously low number. That's part of the problem here and the main reason I'm making this presentation. This is fair. 46 to 50,000 casualties. How many of those are dead? Well, maybe some that were in bed back home for 4 months ended up dying and we didn't know about it. This is how it was always presented and needs to be presented. History now tells you exactly the number of dead, right down to the man for the Union, just over 3,000, right down to the man. Ridiculous. It doesn't even have a little asterisk saying, well, the 14,000 wounded, many ended up dead. Doesn't even say that. Just tells you the number. It's ridiculously low. I can't explain it. Call it whatever you want, a reality breakdown or something else. Either way, it defies all logic. Once again, history all over the place. Bullet point 1. More than 40,000 men became casualties in the Battle of Gettysburg, the bloodiest clash of the Civil War. It's not like a little bit different by 500. It's basically 10,000 off the mark that is most accepted, closer to 50,000. Well, who put these bullet points together? Why are they using a different number? Why is the sources of information coming from a different well? Why wouldn't, say, the Library of Congress or a federal source? Who else would have access to this information? Why didn't a federal source cement the final numbers in like 1921? What is going on? Why is it still bouncing around? It's 2023. Isn't there a central well where these numbers and statistics come from? And wouldn't it have to in some way be associated, that well coming from what we call the federal government? More general history here that doesn't match up with Gettysburg. First 2 bullet points. More than 3 million men fought in the Civil War. This is from the Library of Congress. 2% of the population, more than 620,000, died in it. Now, this is talking about 2% of the entire U.S. population, not 2% of those that fought. 2% of the entire U.S. population, which was 30-some million at the time. I looked it up. I forget the number. Say 35 million. So 2% of the... So in other words, if the Civil War was going on while you lived, whether you were a grandmother at age 60-something, just needing bread, or you were whoever, anywhere in the U.S., you had a 2% chance of dying in the Civil War as any member of the general population, man or woman. Yet there was only just over a 3% chance, if you were a soldier marching into Gettysburg, that you would die in the Battle of Gettysburg if you were a Union soldier. 2% for the general population chance of dying in the Civil War, and only 1% higher chance of dying if you're a Union soldier marching in with a regiment from Vermont to fight Gettysburg. Are you kidding me? Let's look at this little side story to see if this part of history helps put everything together or it actually makes it worse. I'll give you 2 guesses, but you're only going to need one. It says, this explains the riveting story of how a local physician made it his mission to identify as many of the Southern dead as possible to save them from oblivion. How he did so and the heartbreaking details involved is riveting. This section also sets forth how another Gettysburg doctor disinterred 3,320 sets of Confederate remains and shipped them south between 1871 and 1873. Partially in an effort to keep them from being obliterated by area farmers. So years after, okay, remember the battle was 1863, 1871, a doctor disinterreds. That means you dig the remains up or whatever's in the mass graves, digs them up and sends 3,320 sets of Confederate remains back to the South for a proper burial. Now, does that mean if that's 3,320 bodies, that's almost the entire number of dead, according to official sources? So one doctor, he, what's the word here again? What's the word, Thunderbird? He disinterred. It means dig them back up and ship it says 3,320 sets of remains. Now, what does that mean exactly? We don't know. Okay, we don't know. But this whole thing doesn't make sense. What would you be digging up 7 years later? 7 to 10 years later? What would you be digging up? Bones? Or how it would not be identified? You couldn't identify the people? Or what is going on here? It's weird. Let a dead man lie. You dig up the bones of somebody that has no chance of you can even identify them and just put them on a train and ship them south. They're damn spirits rolling around. If they're in the ground, let them lie, damn it. Let's take a look at this. For 110 years, the number stood as gospel. 618,000 men died in the Civil War. 360,000 from the North, 258,000 from the South. By far the greatest death toll of any American war. But the whole point of what's being presented here, new research shows the numbers were far too low. The bottom, it says upwards of 750,000 possibly. Let's just use the 618,000 because it could be 750. We'll round it up to 620,000. All right? Now, what percentage of men, if that's the number that died, men who participated in the Civil War who died, what percentage of the total died in Gettysburg, the bloodiest and biggest battle of them all? About 1%. 1%. And it's if you go to 750,000 per the number below, that death toll is way too low. And this isn't talking about the general population or some farmer that was shot for supplies or something. This is the men who participated in it as soldiers. It's less than 1% chance you would die at Gettysburg. Less than 1%. But it's the bloodiest battle and the largest battle of the Civil War. You see how the official death numbers just are absolutely insane for Gettysburg? Look at this. More than 3,500 Union soldiers were reinterred from their battlefield graves into the new Soldiers' National Cemetery. 3,500 removed. What's the problem? Well, there wasn't that many dead. They moved more bodies than there were bodies. Hey, Google, right now, show me the number of Union soldiers that died. I'm just asking Google right now, which is probably powered by the Chad. Google says 3,155. This is reinterment. This is moving of a body. This is difficult to do. So not only, let's just say it was 100%. You know how ridiculous that is? They reinterred every single soldier to the new Soldiers' National Cemetery, or I guess that's still at Gettysburg, but they were reinterred, moving of a body. Didn't you see Pet Cemetery, sir? Didn't you see Poltergeist? Let's say it was 100%. They didn't check with anybody's family and say, no, you leave. Not many families would say, you leave them lie where they are. I don't want the body moved. How many thousands of families would have said, no, you leave the dead alone? Here it says they moved more than the actual dead. Does anybody find this problem with the way history is being presented? Matt, they got it wrong. They moved 2 pet cemeteries too. That's how it got to 3,500. I'm sorry if I'm sounding disrespectful, but if reality is going to insult my intelligence, I need to insult it back. I want to go out of my way to say no disrespect to any soldier that died in the Civil War. Okay, no disrespect to you, good sir or madame or whoever was pulled into it and all the horses that died and all the civilian casualties. I respect that. I disrespect reality trying to play games with me. This is ridiculous. If you're screaming at me, though, I can hear you. That when they reinterred the bodies, they weren't marked graves. They didn't have the guy's name. Almost all of them were unknown. Okay, I hear you. But they didn't check in general with the families? The family in general didn't know that their son died at Gettysburg? Yeah, I think they did. That last thing we knew was Billy was going off to Gettysburg, and then we never heard from him again. Well, you think he's dead or you think he's on a Caribbean island somewhere? They knew he died at Gettysburg. They didn't check with the families, and the families just overwhelmingly said, yeah, dig them all up. It's just, that's weird too. Let them lie, man. Check this out. Letter in the opinion section of some newspaper. Please use accurate numbers of deaths at Gettysburg in the opinion section. July 7th, 2013. Several times this past week, articles pertaining to the Battle of Gettysburg stated that 58,000 soldiers, now it's up from 51, the casualties numbers were 48 to 50, now it's up to 58, jumping all over is not the point of this section, stated that 58,000 soldiers died there during the 3 days, July 1, July 3, 1863. The fact is simply not historically correct. In fact, it is not even close to being correct. While those stand as the bloodiest 3 days in the Civil War, the number of dead did not approach 58,000. Total casualties on both sides killed. And then this person's reiterating the new reality definition of casualties: killed, wounded, captured, and missing. Well, that just changed the definition of casualty. There were between 46,000 and 51,000, depending on the records you access. Military records indicate the Union suffered 3,200 killed, 14,500 wounded, 5,400 captured or missing, while the Confederacy, 4,700 killed, 12,700 wounded, and 5,900 captured or missing. So let me get this straight. The articles, it says several times this past week, articles pertaining to the Battle of Gettysburg. Not some guy just yelling off his rooftop who's half drunk. Articles saying 58,000 died. And the real number here is 7,900, according to this person that writes in. 7,900. So the articles, here's how off they were in terms of the total number of dead. They weren't off by 400 soldiers. They were off by 50,100 soldiers. The articles talk about journalistic recklessness. They're off by 50,100 dead. That's not even a rounding error. It is to the U.S. debt as it racks up each day, but that's not even a rounding error. See, guys, when reality shifts, there's things called residuals. And those base their information off those residuals, which eventually go away. I'm not going to use the first and last name of an ex-leader of a failed state somewhere towards the southern half of Africa. I'm not going to use that name. Either way, it's the same thing. Articles were getting it wrong by 50,000. You think, oh, let's just say there was one guy somewhere that had a blog with 2 followers. That would even be egregious. These were supposedly articles in a known publication. The person has to write in, letter to the editor. Now, they should be upset. The person wrote in. Reality as it exists today, it's a fluid reality, and it changes. This person's right. Per reality that exists today, and all of past reality, retrocausality, and in a retrocausal fashion reflects what exists today. He or she who's writing this is correct. Who are these people writing these articles, getting these numbers wrong? But the person that originally were writing the articles aren't just pulling the number out of the air. They're getting the dead and the total dead number from a source that they consider to be an official source, if you see the problem here. Okay, let's just look again at Pickett's charge to show that the total dead number can't possibly be correct. Just one charge on one day in one part of the battle. Pickett's charge. In the Confederate attack that came to be known as Pickett's Charge, Robert E. Lee launched 12,000 infantrymen, some say 12,500 infantrymen, against Meade's Federalists in a do-or-die effort to win the battle at Gettysburg. Desperate they were, yeah. The Confederates performed valiantly against overwhelming odds, but in the end, they proved invincible. Less than an hour after they started, 7,500 had fallen to the enemy. Okay, and then Blood talked about retreat. 7,500 had fallen to the enemy. This is from my Gettysburg, quote, Time Life book here. Now, what does that mean to you? 7,500 had fallen. Would you go as far to say deaths? Would that be completely out of the question? No, fallen could be, Matt, one of the ball musket things hit off somebody's toe, and a guy just kind of hobbled back to the lines. And then what they were able to do is put a white flag up and say, don't shoot me anymore. My toe just got taken off. Oh, don't shoot that guy. He's already injured. Well, it's just a big toe injury. That's okay. Let him go. That was part of the warfare, wasn't it? Am I missing something? How do you interpret this? 7,500 had fallen. Well, there's almost nobody that lives on the face of the earth that's going to interpret this as anything other than deaths. So one charge, 1 hour, has way more deaths than the total for the 3 days. Okay, Matt, you repeat. I guess when I'm saying reality's broken down, I have to repeat myself. This isn't easy for most people to accept. If I don't have overwhelming evidence, everybody's going to come the palace guard and write me off and say, oh, there's no way, he must be wrong about that. He's just getting his facts. I have to present this in overwhelming fashion. I have to repeat myself, especially if this gets out to the normal people in the world that don't believe what we do about reality. Okay, this snippet here is not Pickett's charge anymore, but it's just a general sense as to how horrible and bloody this battle was at Gettysburg. Of the 262 Minnesotans who had so furiously hurled themselves at Wilcox's brigade, only 47 men remained fit for combat. 82% of those that engaged were killed or injured. 82%. How many were killed? How many were injured? We don't know. But you think it's going to be the same percentage that official history presents? Like 95% just injured, only 5% or so killed. It just doesn't make sense. And this is, again, maybe every battle, of course, didn't go this poorly, but it just gives you a sense that this is just some random battle talked about in my book. And 262 went in and only 47 walked out as fit for combat. Here's more on Pickett's charge. Pickett's words were close to the truth. He had lost nearly 3,000 men, or more than half of his complement, in the charge, and the division's officer corps had been virtually annihilated. All the officers virtually annihilated. Every one of the 15 regimental commanders had fallen, and had 16 of 17 field officers under them. 2 brigadier generals and 6 colonels were among the division's dead. See, guys, so do you think in most battles, the officers, the rate of death is like 90% higher than the soldiers that are out front, right? Is that the way most battles work? So if almost every officer was wiped out, how do you think the grunt did on the front lines? You think they just were all good? I mean, this by itself shows you, here's another. Now, before we just said 7,500 fallen. This is something else, but who knows what is the exact definition of his complement. But here it says 3,000 men lost. Now this, based on the entire paragraph, is talking about death. It's not talking about wounded. This absolutely means minimum 3,000 dead. Now, the total number of dead for the entire Battle of Gettysburg, Google, show me the total number of Confederate soldiers dead for the entire 3-day battle at Gettysburg, 3,900. So in one charge, it was 3,000 dead, and it was just 900 dead the other 3 days. In all the other battles, they fought 10 hours a day. Okay, I have to keep doing this over and over again when I'm talking about something as significant as a reality breakdown. Another sentence on Pickett's charge. Within minutes, every Confederate who had crossed the wall was killed or captured. Everyone, at least this part of the charge, that had crossed the wall was killed or captured. Now, what do you think the ratio is between killed and captured? It's the third day. There's dead everywhere. You don't think you're going to get out alive. All the resources are left. It's do or die for the entire Civil War. You think the Union soldiers were like, I think they want to surrender. Let's just stop the fighting and let's devote tons of resources to capture them. When they were able to capture without devoting a ton of the resources, I'm sure they did. But if there was any doubt, they couldn't devote resources to bind them up and capture them, then feed them and clothe them, whatever. If there's any doubt that the battle was not yet won, they wouldn't have been captured. That takes a lot of resources and pens and jails, and they would have been killed. Wouldn't have been 50-50. Here it says every single one. This is taken from my book, The Terrible Price That Was Paid. The men shown on these pages were among the 50,000 casualties at Gettysburg, 30% of all those who engaged, making it the bloodiest single battle fought on American soil. The bloodiest ever fought on American soil. But official numbers show you had about a 97% chance of walking away, not dead. Of course, do you think they're showing all these pictures on all these pages because these people are just injured and just took a ball musket to behind the knee? Or do you think these people are being shown because and being presented as casualties because they died? Of course, because they died. I don't know when this book was made. I should look at the copyright date, but it certainly doesn't reflect the history that shows today. Look at the language and the way the language is used regarding casualties. What do you think is intended by the author? As musters were taken on the morning of July 4th, the degree of Confederate disaster became more apparent. Official records would place the Confederate Army's losses at 20,448, but the actual figure was probably closer to 28,000, or nearly 40% of those engaged, compared with the federal casualty rate of 25%. Now, if we are to assume reading this, that per official history, that roughly 95% were just wounded and probably a lot lived, don't you think there would be a sentence or two about that? As Greg and I have discussed many times, the presentation, at least in the past, about casualties at Gettysburg overwhelmingly implies deaths. Or how could you possibly write it this way? This is a summary part of this Time Life book. How could you possibly just present it as casualties, take the number up to 28,000? Everybody reading it assumes almost all of them were dead, even though the official definition of casualty is wounded or killed. But if this is the summary part of this book, you're not going to have a second sentence saying, well, we would like you to know that the official numbers are only 3,900 dead. So when we're presenting 28,000 total casualties, most were just wounded and presumed to be alive, not today, but to be alive 6 months to a year after the battle. There isn't a second sentence here. There isn't a little asterisk saying, see the bottom. Nothing. Of course, the reader and the author assumes the reader to assume deaths is in terms of the primary definition behind casualty. 28,000, not 3,900 as reflected today. I have to end with this because I can hear the Palace Guard, the defenders of reality. Matt, there's got to be a reason. You jump all the way to the last rung on the ladder of reality breakdown. And defenders of reality, the Palace Guard, I can hear them saying, Matt, it was a civil war. They have no real accounting. No, history shows there's tremendously detailed accounting, so much so that it doesn't even make sense how it was so detailed. Here's an example. From my same Time Life book, it says, moreover, General Meade had the condition of his own army to consider. An early morning head count on July 4th, this is the third day or before the third day of the battle, an early morning head count showed only 51,414. officers and men reporting for duty. What was it? Some estimates say he came in with a total army of 90,000. This seemed to indicate that more than 38,000 men have been lost in battle. Can anybody anticipate why I wanted to show you this segment of my Time Life book as another aspect of this history that makes no sense? An early morning head count on July 4th. Okay, days of the battle. July 1, July 2, July 3. They fight basically all day long for 3 days. So after 10 hours on July 1st of charges up the middle and roundabout maneuvers, I don't know. Matt, you ain't no tactician, are you? I know I didn't go up 15 minutes away, the Valley Forge Military Academy, Tom Cruise and Timothy Hutton or whatever, and Sean Penn. I didn't go to TAPS up there. It's just 15 minutes from here. I tried to go in. They threw me out. I didn't have no military upbringing in grade school at TAPS, right? So I'm trying the best I can here. But after all the shit that goes on for 3 days, roundabout maneuvers, Matt, that's an amusement park ride. Charges, blood, cannon fire, dead horses. They're going to do an early morning head count that showed an exact number of 51,414. How do you do that early morning head count? Is that like the Ferris Bueller's Day Off? Smith, yeah, here. Jones, Cameron, here. Bueller. Where's Buell? He died. He died in Pickett's charge. How do you do an early morning head count? No, don't nobody tell me that the regional commanders or the sergeants report up to your little company and then you report up. Come on, man. After 3 days of this sort of carnage, when some of the battles say 60%, 70% of the officers were wiped out, you're going to do an early morning head count that produces an exact number of 51414? Who's in that tent over there lying with half a leg? Oh, that's Jerry. All right, count him. Jerry's here. He's got half a leg, but count him. Give me a break. How could these exact numbers be produced? This is bullshit. So, if you allow me to summarize, we have roughly 90,000 soldiers coming, the Army of the Potomac coming down from the north, meeting Lee and Pickett and his generals coming up from the south, just over 70,000 in the culmination, what would be the turning point in the United States Civil War. They meet over 3 days. And let's just end showing you what this close hand-to-hand combat or line against line, fixing bayonets, close quarters, over 3,000 horses were killed. Shouldn't the horses killed to men killed be like 10-1? 3,000 horses killed. I remember distinctly reading that just yesterday. I'm sorry I can't find it for you now. So almost as many horses as Union soldiers? Does that make sense to you? Okay, 90,000 meets 70,000, and you have roughly a 97% chance of living. If you're a private for the North, Mom, good. Ma, 97% chance I'm living, Ma. Not 20% anymore, Ma. 97%. I'm good, Ma. Don't you worry one bit. It's actually more unsafe for you to go down to the local market and get dried meats than to me to go off to Gettysburg. Don't you worry about a thing, Ma. We have various degrees of and various definitions of the word casualty, where some official sources use a 10,000 number, 10,000, 5,000 roughly on each side, of captured or missing. They put 10,000 into the total casualty number, which is usually around 50,000, that other official sources don't even use that in their casualty number. One side looks at 10,000 different, not 100 different, 10,000 different. You have ridiculous elements in the story like we just talked about. Official head counts. Okay, now that the battle's over, I want you everybody stand. I can't stand up. I ain't got no leg. How else are we going to do the official head count? Everybody step forward. I can't step. How'd they do the official head count? We could make fun of that piece basically forever. We have stories of is it called reinterment, was it, of bodies and graves? The moving of bodies more than the official death count. They moved more dirt than bodies associated with the dirt. We have those elements. We have eyewitness testimony or some sort of accounts just associated with Pickett's charge, the maneuver of the Confederate Army on day 3, that show a death count just from Pickett's charge, or if you put the pieces together from this testimony, the death count just from one charge is greater than the official number of dead for the entire Confederate Army for all battles over 3 days. So just one charge blows the official death count that Google just showed me, 3,900, out of the water. Well, Matt, in summary here, you got to tell us what is going on here. I don't know. And I'm going to keep this to a minimum because I don't know who's going to listen to this presentation. Can't go too far, talk too much about shifts in reality and things like that if people aren't prepared to have that sort of discussion. What they'll do is they'll see that part of the presentation as insane, and they will use that just to write off everything I said before. Because this part will be insane, which I'm not going to get into, they'll say, well, this guy his research just must be wrong. He's a crazy man. He's a loon. So they'll use that to justify not believing in any part of my presentation, when none of it, if isolated or they were to do their own research in terms of what history is presenting, makes any sense at all. So we'll just keep it vague. For some reason, history, it was just people that went and overwrote history, and little blue people came in and changed some of the books around, or there's been a shift to reality itself. History or reality, however you want to posit it, is in love with low death numbers at Gettysburg. The presentation of low death numbers that doesn't make any sense and cannot be supported other than just telling me those numbers are low, not supported by anything or any sort of testimony that happened on the ground. Why history or reality is in love with this presentation right now? Is it a glitch in reality? We'll keep all this to a minimum. Again, I don't want to lose anybody on the back end that took a little bit of this presentation seriously. It would not be people that have been researching as long as we have. So I'll just say I hope the people that might be picking this presentation up that haven't been researching or looking at the things we have over the past 5 to 10 years will maybe give that sort of research a little bit more credence and credibility. This isn't the only thing we found, folks. There's like 1,000 things in this world that make no sense if you get your head out of your ass and turn off the CNN for 5 minutes a day. Thanks for listening.